This is Geek Gab with your host, Daddy Warpig. I am back. Geek Gab for Saturday, April 14th, 2018. I have terrible news for you today, folks. Absolutely terrible, horrible news that is not related, by the way, to the August assemblage of guests that we have on the show today. My horrible, terrible news is that my co-host John is not going to be with us on the show, but to make up for it, and I will be honest, this is the only way I could make up for it, is we have brought a vast panel of intelligent and educated and talented guests here on the show to fill in some small way for that unfortunate gap I have left in your hearts for this week. We are talking today with the authors who have been nominated for the Prometheus Awards by the Libertarian Futurist Society. The Libertarian Awards are an ancient and storied award going back to 1979 that are nominated for libertarian-oriented fiction. And so, without further ado, I am going to allow my guests to get a word in edgewise so that we can do some quick introductions, and you may know who is on the show. Gentlemen, how are you this Saturday?
Doing great.
Doing good.
Thanks. Now is the time, if you felt the need, that you can turn your hearing, your volume back up in case that was too much.
For our listeners listening in, Daddy Warpig, or as I've chosen to call him, Daddy, warned us that the intro was going to be insanely loud. So we all had our headsets turned down, but it wasn't that loud. It wasn't bad.
So why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself since you've taken the lead here?
All right. I'm Andy Weir, author of The Martian. That's what I'm most known for, but I'm up for the award because of Artemis, which is my second book. And it's about a city on the moon that has a fairly laissez-faire capitalist economy, I guess.
I am disappointed, honestly, that you did not mention your other claim to fame.
What's that?
Your webcomic.
Oh, yes, Casey and Andy.
Which
yes.
I have read, and which has its own GURPS source book.
Yes, it does.
True fame.
Yes, true fame. That's when you know you've made it. I, for many years, wrote a webcomic called Casey and Andy, and that was just good, silly fun about a couple of mad scientists.
Who die a whole lot.
They die a lot, and then without explanation, they're fine, the next day.
I was introduced to your webcomics by Eric Burns, his webcomics criticism site, which is unfortunately now defunct. But I read through all of Casey and Andy, actually, and read some more earlier this week, just in preparation for the show.
Well, there you go.
Next in line, we have Karl Gallagher.
Hi, I'm Karl Gallagher. I one-time a designer of real rockets who's now turned to writing about fictional rockets because it's actually a lot more fun to get the book out the door than to watch your rocket canceled for lack of funding. I have published the Torch Ship trilogy, 3 novels, Torch Ship Pilot, and Torch Ship Captain, which, in addition to various adventures against, kidnappers and poachers and other stuff, our heroes get sucked into a conflict where humanity is facing off against killer robots and have to deal with the question of what's the best way to deal with them, total centralized control to make sure that they can't get a wedge in, or let 1,000 flowers bloom and let individuals try every option to find the best way to survive despite the artificial intelligences. And humans being humans, that conflict turns violent.
And honestly, hearing that you were at one point a rocket scientist does make some of the more interesting things I found about your book. And I mean interesting in a good way. The fact that you were so specific about the internal layout of I know this is a tiny point, and people are going to be sitting here thinking that That's what you focused on. He's got a war raging across the entire galaxy. And what you focus on is the internal details of the ship's layout. Yeah, I did. I thought that was really, really interesting how you did that and how it laid out, and especially the illustrations of the same during the book. I really liked the layout of the ship.
That really goes back to being a game master and having the deck plan for the ship laid out as we played Traveler or a Firefly role-playing game or whatever, and just carrying that on into the fiction.
100 of those Traveler books, and my dad threw them away when I went to college.
Oh!
It was like, those little staple-bound,
oh gosh, yes.
Those little books.
Oh, I still have some.
Beowulf.
I have no idea what those things would be worth today, but
the good news is they're not too expensive. I only bought a few back in the day because I was too young to have much money. So I've been lurking on eBay thinking maybe it's time to put together a complete collection. So you can get them back if you want to.
Also, if you're not a stickler for having the original books, which some people may or may not be, they're available via print on demand on Drive-Thru RPG, so that people can get the same text, same illustrations, same everything as the original books, just not the actual vintage books. It may not matter.
I don't care too much about vintage, but I do like dead trees in my hand.
So since you're talking anyway, go ahead and introduce yourself, Travis.
Great. Hi, Travis Corcoran. I'm a software engineer, and I've run a couple of small companies, e-commerce and other such things. And let's see, these days I live on a farm up in New Hampshire where I do remote contracting and write a little bit of science fiction. I'm here because of the first book in a 4-book series, The Powers of the Earth, which is followed by Causes of Separation, which is pre-order at Amazon right now. And this is a series about a independent, anarcho-capitalist as opposed to laissez-faire colony on the moon in the year 2064. So like Andy, I've got a libertarian society on the moon, and like Karl, I've got AIs or AI, and then I guess off in the direction of David Brin, I've also got uplifted dogs, where the humans who designed them sort of overshot the mark and are a standard div or two above baseline humans as far as IQ. So that's what I'm about.
Excellent. And now we come to the traditional death match between Ken and John to see who gets to go next.
Ken, this is John. It's all you.
Yeah.
Hi. Hi, John. My name's Ken MacLeod. I'm a science fiction writer. I live in Scotland in the UK, and I've been a full-time writer since 1997. And before that, I was a programmer. And before that, I was trying to be a scientist. And before that, I was a science fiction fan who got misled into thinking that because I was a science fiction fan, I really should be a scientist, which I'm not. And the novel I'm on the shortlist for the Prometheus Award is the 3rd volume of a trilogy. The trilogy is called The Corporation Wars. The novel is Emergence. The previous 2 are, looks around and tries to remember what they are, Dissidents and Insurgents. And these are published by Orbit, and they are set about 1,000 years in the future around another star about 25 light years away. And it's a robot interstellar colonization is going on with the prospect of terraforming, and there's the usual slightly hand-wavy post-singularity stuff about uploading and downloading and so on. And the robots, some of the robots become self-aware and start basically to reinvent their Lockean property rights from the ground up, and things get sticky after that.
I want to confess my, what would you call it, my lack of cosmopolitan knowledge. The only reason why I know how to correctly pronounce your last name is because I've seen Highlander.
There can be only one.
So with the last name of MacLeod, you are actually of Clan MacLeod, right? You're Ken MacLeod of Clan MacLeod?
Yes. Not. But you can't call me Ken MacLeod of Clan MacLeod, because MacLeod of MacLeod is the name of the clan chief. Not that I have anything to do with him. But that's the formal definition. He lives in Dunvegan Castle, quite near where my father grew up, and really we have no connection with them whatsoever.
Mr. Hunt, I guess we're down to you. Unfortunately, Sarah Hoyt could not be with us today, and so we wish her the best of luck with whatever she has going on.
Hi, and thank you for having me on the show. I appreciate joining this distinguished gathering. My name is John Hunt. I'm co-author with Doug Casey of Drug Lord. 6 or 7 novels. The first one was called Speculator. And Doug and I write these together, plus do a whole lot of other adventurous things within the libertarian constructs and anarcho-capitalist. Is traveling between Miami and Argentina today, so he's not here. But I greatly appreciate being here. Our book that we became a finalist for the Prometheus Award for is called Drug Lord. Came out last fall, and it's the second episode of Charles Knight's multiple career life, where he's moving from career to career, all of which are generally considered immoral or unethical by the regular world. So, but he is a moral actor always. So the first book, he's speculator. Second, he's a drug lord. Third, he's an assassin. The fourth, he's a terrorist. The fifth, he's a warlord. And the sixth, he's Antichrist. And these books always...
That's a fairly common career path, I think.
Yeah. It works for him. But he gets to... In Drug Lord, he's taking on 2 careers. He comes back to the United States after many years, and he picks up 2 concurrent careers, one of which is as starting up a pharmaceutical firm and in the legal pharmaceutical realm. And the second is running black market illegal drug operations in and around Washington. And it gets to compare the morality and ethics of the formal legal pharmaceutical industry versus the free market activities of the drug world. And it's great fun, but in the process, what makes it science fiction is that he invents, or he helps get to market a drug that prevents people from lying to themselves. And that elimination of that ability, the drug is called Naked Emperor, and that ability to not lie to yourself is a huge threat to the established order, which quickly moves to ban it and makes a new agency to extinguish Naked Emperor from the planet, along with Charles Knight, so that such things as various religions and ideologies and central bankers don't get, and whatever else happens to thrive on people's abilities to not necessarily tell themselves the truth. All of them are threatened by this, so they all gang together and leave Charles Knight up against the world.
Okay, folks, now we've got introductions out of the way. And because he's running short on time to be on the show, I'm going to ask Mr. Weir a question that Karl Gallagher actually suggested, which is, how did your work involve personal liberty, and why do you think they nominated you for the Prometheus?
Sure. Well, first off, I just want to apologize to everybody. I failed to correctly subtract 3 from the East Coast time of this to figure out my own schedule for today. I'm on the Pacific Coast, and so I ended up with a scheduling conflict that was entirely my fault. So that apology out of the way. I think so. Basically, I didn't set out to write a story about, oh, this is going to be about libertarianism. It was the other way around. I said, I want to, kind of figure out what a society on the moon would look like. The first city on the moon. There's only about 2,000 people there. Its income is primarily from the tourism industry. The only conceit in the story is that the price to low Earth orbit has been driven down low enough that middle-class people can afford to go into space. And you could afford even if you're just like an normal, like kind of working class schmo in America, you can afford to go to the moon as sort of a once in a lifetime opportunity. Anyway, so I just kind of tried to guess at what the economics of the city would look like, and it ended up being libertarian because that's pretty much how all frontier civilizations or little societies are. They don't have the resources to have a bunch of rules. They don't have the resources to enforce a bunch of rules. And in fact, most of the rules in Artemis, the titular city, are just safety. Like, okay, we're living in a city that's on the moon, so we're really going to care if you like endanger the hull, right? But stuff like economics ends up being completely unregulated, which causes opportunities for some people and also causes problems for others in the story, without giving away too many spoilers.
Let's ask the same question to Mr. MacLeod.
Well, I'm very honored to be nominated, and I suppose the reason why these books got the nomination, because the previous two were nominated last year, is that although I'm not personally really a libertarian or whatever, except in a very general sense of civil liberties and personal liberty and so forth, I do take libertarian thought very seriously and have done for many years. In fact, right from the start of my science fiction writing and before that. And the Corporation Wars, the whole idea of it was actually inspired by a kind of chance juxtaposition of two book spines on my bookshelf when I was frantically casting about for my next pitch a few years ago. And that was Mind Children by Hans Moravec. And The Machinery of Freedom by somebody called David Friedman, who I'm sure you've heard of. And
so you suddenly for 1 second, which is to say that I specifically call out that book in the afterword to mine. So fascinating. I'm sorry.
Oh yeah. I've been alluding to it more or less from the start. But the idea in Moravec's book, he has a chapter called Wildlife, I think, where the idea, which has been often used in many different economic philosophies, actually the idea that eventually production and so on gets sufficiently automated that you can move all industry off Earth. And basically everybody is either a rentier or, you're basically everybody is born rich if you have shares in the machinery, or could be. And the human beings are kind of living humanity is settling into a long and happy retirement, and the machines are off doing all the work. And as long as the machines aren't conscious, of course, that's not a problem. But as it turns out, when the machines start becoming conscious and self-aware, it does become a problem. However, this has been foreseen by the artificial intelligences that behind the scenes really run the show on Earth and in the solar system and have a representative in the extrasolar colony. It's called the Direction. The Direction has foreseen this, and they have uploaded the personalities of dead war criminals, as they regard them, from the last World War. And the last World War was fought at the end of the 21st century between the reaction, basically neo-reaction, which I recently discovered when I was casting about for ideas for these books, and accelerationists, who are kind of, in some ways, far left extremists who want to get through capitalism as fast as possible, therefore they want to let it rip. And out of the chaos and destruction that these two warring ideologies cause, the Direction has emerged and clamped down. And so these dead war criminals have their mind states uploaded, stored, and sent off in the probe to the other star. And when the robots start getting uppity, they get reawakened into virtual environments, which they have immense philosophical trouble sorting out between their virtual environments and reality, and then into little robot bodies who go out and fight the rebellious robots. So to complicate matters further, some of these people are from the acceleration faction and others are from the reaction. And as you might imagine, the only real good guys in the story, in the three novels, are the robots.
It's interesting to me, looking at the books that have been nominated, and also that there seems to be some commonalities between, and maybe that's a result of a nominating process or who did the nominating, but it seems there's a lot of threads, especially with like AI, narco-capitalism, and so forth. Is that a reflection of like the zeitgeist? Sorry if I'm using, arrogant German terminology, the zeitgeist, or was there something specific that may have prompted all of these similar things to come out at the same time? Anybody can answer, whoever has a thought on this.
Well, in my particular case, the AI was not, necessarily part of the zeitgeist, although it certainly is. But the fact that my novels do two things, and I'll only address one of them right now, which is they are sort of a dialogue with Heinlein's The Moon is a Harsh Mistress. So if you have Mike in The Moon is a Harsh Mistress, and you want to sort of update that and interrogate it and make it a little more complex and layered than, Heinlein, hey, friendly AI, because of course it's friendly, bring it into a sort of less wrong rationalist sphere where you have to worry about AI motivations. This is one of the great things from Heinlein that you need to unpack and make much more complex and then investigate. So, there had to be a moon colony, there had to be an AI. That's my answer, at least, and I'll let others speak.
It's a sensitive subject right now because we're starting to get bit by the leading edge of AIs having real impacts. I mean, there was a case that marketing people tell each other where a father found out his daughter was pregnant because the marketing software for the Target stores started sending coupons for diapers and baby formula and stuff because they had analyzed her purchasing pattern and gone, this person is pregnant. She's buying the pattern of purchases of someone newly pregnant. But this teenage girl had not told her father, but nevertheless the software, which is not intelligent software, it's not self-aware, but it's still figuring out something that humans hadn't figured out and upsetting the hell out of some people. And so this is something we're going to have to figure out how to deal with one way or the other. And one of the aspects I brought up in mine was that, the revolt of the artificial intelligences, I'm going to spoiler something for you here, turns out it was not them becoming self-aware and revolting, but safety mechanisms that had been installed had failed in a catastrophic way. And so the infrastructure of the planet collapsed, killing lots of people and forcing others to flee the planet to survive.
And I have read the Torch Ship series, and I thought the origin of the crisis that brought down the civilization on Earth was quite interesting and quite clever. I really, really liked that. It shows, and that's the reason why I especially liked it, is it shows what happens when programmers who are thinking logically implement something that's perfectly logical that happens to be an absolute total mismatch with how real humans behave in the real world. People who are programmers get bit by that all the time.
I was a programmer for 25 years. I know how that is. What is it? In software, we have that term, the kind of marketing idea where there are people say like, oh, we should make a spreadsheet application that also is an email client. And people are like, because almost everybody who uses one will want the other. And the analogy that explain why that's a bad idea is say like, well, I've noticed that everybody who goes to this burger joint gets a hamburger and a milkshake, so we should have a hamburger flavored milkshake.
Yeah, that sounds so much like my own experiences in working in a very unexciting field of IT, which was simply in really administrative software, both in factories and in universities and other institutions, utilities. And one of the absolutely characteristic failure modes that I found was that the programmers are solving a problem that hasn't been sufficiently specified by the users. Mm-hmm. And I greatly, and after 6 weeks of work or whatever, you bring your shiny application to your ostensible end user, and you find that wasn't really what they wanted, and they really wanted something quite different.
Mm-hmm.
And this happens in the hardware field as well. I've worked on several projects where it's like, well, we'll do something to serve all these different customers who actually have conflicting requirements. And so it becomes a monstrosity.
Yeah, and what I dread actually is that at the moment, AI, the whole AI field may well be in very much that position, with the massive humanity as the users who haven't specified what they want, and the tech geeks are developing the AI as the bushy-tailed programmers.
I live in the heart of Silicon Valley, and I've got a lot of friends who work at Google. And there's one, he says he works in the part that's working on like self-driving cars, that sort of thing. And they have like two signs up right next to each other on the wall. One of them says like, self-driving cars group. Don't worry, we're making AIs, but we're not making robots that they can, freely run around in. And then the other, and that's from the AI group. And then the other poster is from the robotics group saying, don't worry, we're making very strong robots, but we're not going to give them free will.
I think it's going to be interesting to see how the artificial general intelligence develops, and who will be their mentors, who will be the teachers, and how their morality will develop based on who their teachers are. If the bureaucrats and politicians set up the regulatory regime for them, they may end up being quite amoral, immoral, or antithetical to human morality.
Well, AIs will absolutely be antithetical to human morality, because they will just calmly solve whatever problem you hand them. You say like, it'll be like, oh, we need to reduce crime, and it'll tell you a bunch of ethnicities to kill off, and you're like, no, that's not how we want to do this. And that's the quickest solution. It's like, no, AI, bad AI, And so what I think will be interesting is when we have AIs that are giving us really good and useful information that benefits society, but we don't understand how it reaches those decisions. So for instance, nobody really understands the details of how AlphaGo thinks. Like AlphaGo is an AI that can play Go better than any human. And they say, and there are Go masters who analyze its playing style, and they still don't fully understand the philosophy it's using, because it doesn't really have a philosophy. It's a collection of complex neural network layer after layer, and nobody really understands it. So what I think will be interesting, but what I think will be interesting is later on when we have some really complicated neural network that always gives good advice on what to do for the economy. And it'll just be like, one day it'll be like, hey, lower the tax on barley production by 0.003%. And we're like, okay. And we do that. And then suddenly we get like 20 years of boom across all sectors. And we don't even understand why.
I think you're absolutely right that, the interesting thing is not we can't understand. The interesting thing is coming to the realization that there isn't anything necessarily to understand. And we've got this course in Western philosophy and Western science where we sort of looked for reductive principles. And, there have been some thinking that, hey, perhaps the era of reductive principles is over. It's a great tool. We grabbed all of the low-hanging fruit. But some equations you just can't simplify. You can only use numeric methods and actually figure out, what the graph looks like. And there might not be general rules of thumb that an AI is using to, play Go. It might not be trying to grab space. It might just, there's this mess of computation, and this is what comes out. And that's an interesting sort of philosophical twist when you dig deep enough, that not all things that work necessarily have arbitrary short little sentences that make sense to humans to explain them.
Let me interrupt for just a second, because I believe it's almost time for Mr. Weir to take off. I was going to give you a final chance to say whatever you wanted to say about your book and the Prometheus Awards, and then...
Well, I'm honored to be nominated. I will say that my book was not in any way an attempt to pursue an economic or political agenda or moral. It's just that I think is the emergent behavior of people in a frontier society. And yeah, it'll be really, really great to see how this pans out. And good luck, everybody.
Great talking to you.
Thanks for coming on the show, sir.
But not that much luck, right? Because like some luck.
I wish you all to win.
Yeah. All right, guys. Thank you very much. And again, I'm
Have a
sorry
great
I have
day.
to take off early.
Have a good
Bye-bye.
Saturday, sir.
Thanks, you too.
Take care, Andy.
Thank you.
Well, now that I've interfered with the discussion and killed it stone cold dead, let me ask another question to the group about some of the themes that I saw that were in common with the books. By the way, let me tell this to the audience. There are 2 links in the description below the video. One of them will take you to information about the Prometheus Awards itself. That's the first link. And the second one will take you to the Prometheus Awards finalists. That is the people who we are having on the show today. And in that press release, you can read about which books have been nominated. And there are also Amazon links to where you can go to purchase the books if the descriptions are enticing enough that you want to go ahead and read them. The links are right there. Again, that's the it talks about the finalists, and that's the second link under the video. So we've set this up. I've set this up for you that if you want to plumb the depths that we may not touch on the show, you can go ahead and click on either one of those links, and you will have that all delivered right to your doorstep, because that's the kind of totally awesome host I have. Okay. Back to the discussion. The thing I was going to ask about the zeitgeist, or at least the common elements in these books, is what's the deal with narco-capitalism?
By what's the deal? Are you saying what's the overview of what is it, or why is it that we are interested in talking about it?
Sure, any or all of that.
Okay.
I'm curious as to why that became such a strong theme. I don't know that you know that, but
so there's selection bias, right? I mean, you're going to the Prometheus Awards. You know, if you went to the Trotskyist Fiction Awards, you'd be asking, now, why does everyone talk about communism so much? And they keep harping on how Stalin got it wrong. But that aside, there was a phrase that Andy used, which is emergent properties. You know, a lot of times progressives will talk about, you know, capitalism is a system and we've constructed it. It works this way. And I agree with Andy's point that, you know, I think trade is an emergent property, and you don't need a government to create trade. There's all of these, you know, stories documented in history where, you know, an exploratory group that doesn't speak a language encounters another a tribe, and they walk up and they put down 3 steel knives on the ground and step back. You know, and the other natives come forward and put down 6 coconuts, and then the first people take back 1 knife, and they negotiate things. You know, trade creates value and creates utility where none existed before. It increases the size of the pie. So I think that all human and non-human societies will create trade. And so there's one thought that, you know, hey, anarcho-capitalism is better. I'd be happy to make that argument. But there's just another thought of, hey, it's an extreme on a continuum, and extremes on continuums are always more interesting. You know, people want to read and watch Man in the High Castle because it's under, you know, the worst possible governments. You know, people want to watch life and death situations or, you know, romantic comedies. They don't want to see a happy enough couple wake up, make breakfast, and go to their separate jobs. So I think you're going to find tyrannical, terrible things and, you know, utopias both overrepresented in literature. And being sort of extreme, it creates all sorts of plot elements. There's a lot more exciting things happening in a Western where there's minimal government, or, you know, on the moon where there's minimal government. And there's more exciting things happening under Nazi occupation. So that's my answer as to why you're going to see anarcho-capitalism in fiction.
And I can throw out my answer too. This is John. Can I go ahead?
Yeah, please go ahead.
I see it as a combination of 2 of the most moral constructs, the anarchical construct and the capitalist construct. And here's how I'll explain it, which might be old hat to the people on this call, but maybe somebody who listening might not know this frame of reference. So anarchy, you know, it's different. A monarchy is one ruler. Oligarchy is multiple rulers.
It seems like
He very definitely has laws. They're the natural laws, the ones that if we abide by, we stay alive and thrive. So anarchy means no rulers. And then capitalism is that wonderful economic system in which to succeed, you wake up in the morning and you work your butt off as hard as you can. Needs of other people. And that's not the way that the socialists will word things, but that is the reality. To be successful in capitalism, you need to serve others extremely well and extremely efficiently. And that's a highly moral entity, because it's also, on top of it, it's also fits into the voluntarism construct, in which coercion is the evil, and anything voluntary and peaceful is okay and tolerable. So I like putting these two together, and Doug and I both like. Doug is pretty much a straight anarcho-capitalist. I have a lot of libertarianism, but putting these together and writing about what a world would be like, or could be like, or some of the world could be like, if people lived with the concept that we don't need to rule over others, and that we should be engaging in voluntary relationship. What can that world look like, and how much fun we could have in it?
Yeah, I find that very interesting. I am not an anarchist myself in the jargon of libertarianist subfactions. I am a minarchist. For some of the reasons that I think Travis illustrated in his book, which is when you have no, top referee that everybody will agree to the decisions of, you wind up with a lot of, nasty situations that in the real world will wind up with faction fights and feudalism. So what I will have as the extreme in my story is a minarchist situation where you have a government of very minimalist rules. And on the other extreme, you have some tightly controlled governments that I think, cater to the needs of, let's face it, there are people out there who want to rule for everything. They never want to have to, have this gap where something is totally uncontrolled, which I think most of us in, probably all of us in this group would hate living under that kind of thing. But there's some people that it appeals.
It's true. I was in Massachusetts and I hated it.
I spent 4.5 years in Massachusetts, and when I ventured outside my academic island, I was seeing all sorts of stuff. And from what I've heard, it's only gotten more insane since.
Mm-hmm.
But so in mine, I'm showing conflict of different types where you have the, to use Virginia Postrell's terminology, the dynamic societies where individuals can strike out on their own. And then the more static ones, which, want to have a rule for everything. And of course, even in the static society, you've got the internal conflict of, are you going to, from first principles, come up with new stuff, or are you sticking to some traditionalist book, whether it's the Bible or the Quran or the writings of Confucius?
I'm waiting to see if anybody else has a comment on that before I jump in another direction. No? Okay.
Just to finish off on anarcho-capitalism, I don't believe in it, but I find it very interesting. Way back when I first encountered libertarian ideas, it was through anarcho-capitalism. And being one of these geeky, I suppose, far too logical, living in the head types, I took it all very, very seriously and thought through it. And the thing that kind of fed into the Corporation Wars books is that a certain experience that I had, which is that when I was in the trenches of Usenet in the 1990s, I got involved in all the ferocious arguments that went on there when the internet was smaller and more ferocious than it is now. And I realized that some of the people that I had known then as anarcho-capitalists and libertarians had drifted over the years into a position that would now be called alt-right. I won't name any names, but I'm sure you all know some. And I found that disturbing and interesting. And in the novels themselves, in some ways, some of the characters, some of the lower level corporations, the law companies and the defense companies think they're living in anarcho-capitalism. The human beings, where they exist, or the post-human beings who've been revived, think they're living in some kind of communist utopia where everything is free, and the overriding AIs that run it all, albeit at a great many removes, seem to think they're running something like socialism with Chinese characteristics, where they're in charge, but everybody else goes and does their own thing. And if they do their own thing in too dangerous a way, they get jumped on. But otherwise, it's pretty much free and fair competition. So yeah, I've tried to recomplicate these ideas and put them into a new context.
By the way, Ken has brought up twice now neo-reaction, and one thing I just wanted to say is, oh, I'm hearing myself. Am I sounding normal to you guys?
We're getting some duplication on the line. I'm not sure what it's from.
Yeah, okay. I think it's stopped. Anyway, Ken has mentioned twice now looking at both anarcho-capitalism and neo-reaction, which I found a fascinating thing. I imagine everyone's familiar with it, but Ken's first 4 or early 4 books, the Fall Revolution series, I just absolutely loved, and they were formative on sort of what I was doing, because he looked at a similar scenario several times with different solutions. And there was one where sort of Greens did very well, another one where sort of Trotskyists did well, another one where anarcho-capitalism won. And one thing I just find amazing over the last 5 or 10 years is that Mencius Moldbug or Curtis Yarvin has come up with this sort of revived concept of reaction, but neo-reaction, and it doesn't have a big following, but it has a somewhat influential following, and there's some big names out there. And so one thing that I'm doing with my series, and it's not so much evident in books 1 and 2, but books 3 and 4 show it a bit more, is show a tension, that there's multiple different theses out there. There's anarcho-capitalism, there's conventional statism, there's neo-reaction. And, one interesting thing about a lot of neo-reactionary thought, a conventional libertarian would say, my God, this is the opposite of libertarianism. It's centralization and authority. But a anarcho-capitalist friendly neo-reactionary would say, actually, no, it's very similar end goals, which is human freedom with an entirely different mechanism. And so I find it interesting that Ken is looking at neo-reaction in his fiction. It's a very interesting tension with anarcho-capitalism.
So what is it about the Prometheus Awards that made your work so appealing to them that they would put them on the short list? Anybody can answer that.
Well, I just spoke. I'll let someone else go.
Okay, I'll take a swing at it. I think in the Torchship books, a lot of it was just tossing out various options of freedom, of alternate government systems, where there's a very tightly controlled status system, where there's this loose assemblage of worlds that each have a different form of government. One auctions off, parliamentary seats on the grounds that it cuts out the middleman. One has a fairly, conventional system. And there's one which is a pseudo-feudalistic thing where if you want to have a government, you can simply lease a chunk of land from a higher level government and set up your own laws there. And so they have this system where you can have your island with whatever set of rules you want, and people vote with their feet. And on the larger scale, part of the climax of the novel is establishing a treaty entitling everyone to vote with their feet among the various governments that are coexisting.
Wow, I just had a really, really great question to ask, and I completely forgot it. That's horrible. That's awful.
Well, while you're thinking, I could answer the previous one.
Sure.
Jonathan. So, and my guess about the Prometheus Awards and why they speculators nominated last year and Drug Lord finalists this year might be that Doug and I are so focused on the individual and what an individual moral person does. But with the morality defined, of course, as we would define morality, which is a libertarian anarcho-capitalist morality, where we no initiation of force and fraud. And that focus on what the individual does, which is very different than what a government does or what a group of people on a colony do, because, well, groups aren't really moral actors. They don't make moral decisions, whereas the individual does make moral decisions and decides whether the ends justify the means, or whether means are used no matter what their morality to accomplish certain ends. And that's that big battle between the people who believe the ends justify the means and the people who think that no end can be justified by immoral means. And trying to do that battle inside the head of our gradually maturing lead character, as he goes from a 23-year-old in the previous book, Speculator, to a 30-year-old in the pharmaceutical world, while simultaneously looking at not just the individual morality decisions, but what is the relationship between morality and legality. In our where Prometheus Award folk are looking is at the libertarianism of it, because our books aren't future. They're essentially today with science that is invented. So it's science fiction, but it's contemporary.
All right, let me ask a question. This is a general question anybody can answer. We're getting somewhat close to the deadline, so I want to give everybody a chance to do something interesting before we take off. What one thing about your books or series would an audience find most surprising, do you think? Brain teaser. Yeah. I don't throw softball questions here, folks. This is, you got to bring your A game.
I think that if a libertarian reader opened my book, there's a lot of libertarian science fiction out there, or libertarian fiction in general, that is sort of like a Christian movie for a Christian audience, which is, it delivers the line that you're hoping to get. It makes you feel good about you and your tribe. You've got the answers. I'm still a libertarian and anarcho-capitalist, at the grand old age of 46. But with a little bit of wisdom gained over the last 20 years, I've seen that the easy answers and the explanations about why libertarianism works smoothly and delivers perfect answers and everything, the world is more complicated than a lot of simple theories would have it be. So I think that if a libertarian came to my science fiction, they would say, I thought that the libertarian path would be more easy, maybe expecting a little bit more of a Mary Sue, and might say that, I found it surprising that you showed the libertarians having internal factional fights, having difficulty coordinating, and other complications. And if a mainstream person read it, I think they might be a little bit surprised in a similar way, that, I saw this was libertarian and I thought it was going to be, utter schlock, with a lot of political ranting, but the politics are pretty minor, and I can mostly read a story about an AI that might be going exponential and having a hard takeoff, about a race of intelligent dogs that fear for genocide, about lunar colonization and big rusty spaceships. So those are two different angles as an answer.
I think some of the biggest surprises my folks have had reading my books is on the technical side. For one, the concept of you're afraid of a computer virus or artificial intelligence or something infecting your planet's network, so you don't allow ships with computers to come visit your planet. If anybody wants to come to your planet, they have to navigate with slide rules and have a sextant for navigating and have a totally analog system so that they cannot have any kind of dangerous data to infect your system. Although, well, okay, looking at the Amazon reviews, apparently what most people were most surprised was that there was sex in a hard science fiction novel. That was apparently shocking for a few people.
They've never read Asimov, have they?
Yeah, well, there was also someone who was shocked at the concept of a Christian who would both say grace at meal and take the Lord's name in vain and swear the next day. I have to wonder what church they're attending.
Yeah, I was about to say, it doesn't sound like they've met many actual Christians. That's Mr. MacLeod,
What would be, do you think, the single most surprising aspect of your book?
I'm trying to think, actually. The thing that surprised me writing them was just how much fun you can have with philosophical thought experiments and what is ostensibly basically a space opera about little robots hitting each other. Like when you have people living in a virtual reality and they're told by an apparently reliable source that some of the other people living in that virtual reality are what are called philosophical zombies, who act exactly like normal human beings and to all appearances think they are normal human beings, but who you're assured don't have any subjective self-awareness. What happens to your morality and your different interactions with them? Or what happens to a being that comes to self-awareness and discovers that every piece of it, whether it's hardware or software, body or mind, is actually the property of a larger corporation? How does it get out of that? How does it assert its personhood when it is legally property? And how does it defend that? And I found that, you know, that aspect of the story was the most fun. I mean, I brought in a lot of slam bang action and space battles that are over in microseconds and this kind of thing, and tried to really think it through. But it was when you try, it was the discovery was that when you try to think through these things and think through them from the point of view of the machines, you do come up with some surprising and amusing results.
And what about you, Mr. Hunt? What do you think would be audiences find most surprising about your nominated work?
Yeah, I think that I've seen some reviews that are surprised that Doug, who's he's got this newsletter history, newsletter and nonfiction writing. You know, he was a #1 New York Times bestseller, financial nonfiction, could write compelling fiction that would inform them about things, about their government, about bureaucracy, about sociopaths and versus good people. And I think that was a surprise. And I think maybe that's why Doug brought me in, because I had written fiction in the form of National Institute of Health grants and the like. I'm a doctor, research academic. And so that we worked together, and maybe that might be the biggest surprise. But the biggest surprise to me is how when we read our books now, or when we go through them, we can't tell who's writing what line. I have no idea whether I wrote it or Doug wrote it. It's so blended together now, and that has been a wonderful process.
All right, we have about 8 minutes left in the show. I'll start with Mr. Gallagher and give you a chance to say whatever you want before we take off.
Okay, well, thank you for being willing to have us on. Thank you to all of the other authors for joining in on this, on a kind of spur of the moment inspiration to see if we can get folks together. And I was just thrilled by the good response. And thank you everybody out there who's read my books. I appreciate the support, and I intend to keep writing. I have a fantasy novel in work and some space opera that'll be coming down the line. That is, which are both also looking at some of the things about how do humans get along with each other and organize with each other to protect their individual freedom while still managing to get things done and survive.
What about you, Mr. MacLeod? Do you have any final thoughts?
Well, I would echo that point about thanking the LFS for the nomination, and thanking everyone who's listened and everyone who's read these novels and my previous novels, nearly all of which in one way or another do try to wrestle with issues of liberty and government and so on. And to say that Well, the next thing that I'm working on, my current project is editing a book that is built around some drawings that were left by the late Ian M. Banks. So if anyone who has liked the culture novels, which I know even some libertarians do,
oh, I love them.
There will be a book coming out next year with quite a lot of Ian's words in it, some of mine, and lots of drawings of things from the culture. So watch this space.
Do you have any last thoughts, Travis?
Yeah. So just as a quick tangent, Ken said almost sort of, and if any libertarians like Ian Banks, and I just want to mention that I think that some of the best science fiction and science fiction authors are on the left, which I find, I guess I don't want to say I find surprising, but I love Ken's stuff, which is sort of a left libertarian perspective. Ian Banks, the same. China Mayaville, which is, likewise sort of Marxist influenced. And I think that in the current year, there's a lot of tribalism where sort of the pink and the red or whatever the colors are in science fiction are fighting. And I just think that's really foolish, because there's just the best science fiction, to my mind, comes from the political extremes, where you've got these people who passionately have these political opinions, but are rationalist enough to be very good partisans and advocates for their positions. And the artwork that goes with it, as far as, sort of the artistry of writing, is often top notch. But as far as, I guess, we're each giving wrap-ups, please check out my novels, Powers of the Earth and then Causes of Separation. Right now, I'm actually taking a break from fiction writing to write about homesteading and farming, which is something I've been doing for several years now. And as per the Heinlein quote, I am leaning towards the title, a human being should be able to butcher a hog. And after a month or so of work, I'm going to switch back to books 3 and 4 in the Aristillus series, which are going to confront anarcho-capitalism with hardcore left-wing activism. There was a post that went around the internet recently, Days of Rage, and that's something that's going to be very influential. And also it's going to drag in sort of a neo-reaction or helicopter Pinochet sort of things that have to be struggled with. And that'll be rolling out over the next probably 2 years or so. And I'd like to thank all of the other guests here. It was a pleasure and an honor to chat with them. And Ken and Karl, I want to apologize that I am a little bit behind on reading your books, but I'd like to reassure you that I am buying them. So the revenues are flowing, even if they're stacked up next to my reading chair right now. I'm on book 1 of each of your most recent series.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Do you have any last words, Mr. Hunt?
Sure.
Wait a minute. Mr. Hunt, now I feel like that guy from Mission Impossible giving instructions to a secret agent.
This podcast will self-destruct.
Yeah, only my kids call me Dr. Hunt. So it's Mr. Hunt Works. John is what most people in the world call me. Anyhow, I'm grateful. Doug and I are both very grateful for the opportunity to be considered for this. It's great. We're hoping that all of you all win, as I said earlier. I think it's all deserved. I'm hoping that our readers will give our books to their kids at age 15 to 18 to 20 to help provide kind of the opposite, the not necessarily extreme, but what I'd call just the libertarian morality, the voluntarism, the value of not coercing others, to give them a little exposure to that before they go off to college and get their progressive indoctrination. At least in the United States, university is pretty heavy into the indoctrination and the acceptability of ends justifying the means. I want to give them a little inoculation to help stop that.
All right. Well, I myself would also like to thank everyone for coming on the show, being willing to sit down and and discuss all this stuff. I thought we had a fascinating discussion. I very much appreciate all of you coming on the show. I appreciate everybody who showed up in the chat to listen to the show live. Apparently, our guests were so scintillating and exacting in their language that we had no actual questions. Everybody just wanted to sit there and listen to the show. So congratulations on that, gentlemen. This is Geek Gab, Saturday, April 14th for 2018, living right here in the future. It's episode 138, by the way, folks. So if you've been keeping track, you've been listening to the show since the beginning, you've heard a lot of really, really great podcast stuff. Now, just to let you know, those of you who are new, we can be found on YouTube at Geek Gab, youtube.com/GeekGab. And surprisingly enough, if you consult either the iTunes Store, SoundCloud.com, or the Google Play Store, you can do a search for Geek Gab, find this podcast, and subscribe to it. And you will have about once a week an excellent and scintillating discussion delivered straight to the media player or media playing program of your choice. Folks, we are out of here for today. We're gone. We're leaving. But especially John, we will be back.